Artist tunes?
Further on up the road, man.
Yeah,
You gonna give me some of the bucks, man?
And I'd also like to mention that
The man who died in silence. Bobby Bland's hidden final days. There's a house in Memphis. From the outside, it's nothing special. You could walk past it 1,000 times and never give it a second thought. But behind those walls, one of the greatest voices in American history took its final breath, and almost nobody knew Bobby Blue Bland, a name that should be spoken in the same breath as Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, and Aretha Franklin. But it isn't, and that's exactly what he wanted. The man who could make grown men cry with a single note, the artist who shaped the sound of modern soul while the world looked the other way. He spent his last years in that quiet Memphis suburb, far from the stages that had defined his life for 6 decades. What happened in that house during those final months will break your heart. The illness that slowly stole his voice, the regrets he carried, the truth about the music industry that exploited him for decades. And the one thing he said, days before he died, that changed everything we thought we knew about his legacy. This is the story nobody wanted to tell, until now. The Boy Who Couldn't Read. January 27th, 1930, Barrettville, Tennessee, a town so small it barely existed on any map. Robert Calvin Brooks came into a world that didn't want him. His father, gone before the boy could walk, just another black man in the Jim Crow South who couldn't handle the weight of fatherhood. Or wouldn't. Nobody ever knew which. His mother was forced to make an impossible choice. She remarried, and young Robert took a new name, Bobby Bland, a name that would eventually be whispered in smoky clubs and shouted from concert stages. But that was decades away. First, there were the cotton fields. Imagine this. You're 8 years old, your hands are bleeding. The sun is so hot you can barely breathe, and you know this is your life, forever, unless you find a way out. Bobby found a way out. But the price was devastating. He left school in 3rd grade, not because he wanted to, because his family needed every hand in those fields. Education was a luxury for white children and wealthy black families. For the Bland family, survival was the only subject that mattered. Here's the part that will shock you. Bobby Blue Bland never learned to read or write. Not in 3rd grade, not in 10th grade, never. Think about that. One of the most sophisticated vocalists in American music history couldn't read the lyrics he was singing, couldn't sign his own contracts, couldn't write a single note of the music that made him famous. This fact would destroy his life later. But first, it would save him. Because when you can't read music, you have to feel it. Every note, every rhythm, every emotional nuance has to come from somewhere deeper than the page. Bobby developed an ear that could hear things other singers missed, a memory that could hold entire songs after hearing them once, an instinct that couldn't be taught. The cotton fields were his first stage, the work songs, the hollers, the rhythms that the field hands used to make the unbearable slightly more bearable. That was his first education in the blues, and the blues isn't something you learn, it's something you live. The city that changed everything. Bobby was 17, and his mother made a decision that would alter the course of music history. "We're leaving," she told him. "We're going to Memphis." Memphis. The word sounded like a promise, like a dream, like the only chance they'd ever get to escape the poverty that had trapped their family for generations. But here's what nobody tells you about escaping poverty. The new place doesn't welcome you with open arms. It tests you. It breaks you, and only the strongest survive. Bobby and his mother arrived in Memphis with almost nothing. No connections, no money, no plan beyond survive. He washed dishes until his hands cracked and bled. He delivered groceries on a bicycle that fell apart piece by piece. He learned to fix cars in a neighborhood garage where the owner took pity on him and taught him skills that had nothing to do with music. But everything changed when Bobby learned to drive. Think about this. In 1947, for a black teenager in the segregated South, getting a driver's license was more than just practical. It was revolutionary. It meant freedom. It meant opportunity. It meant access to a world that had been locked away. Suddenly, Bobby Bland wasn't just another poor kid trying to survive. He was valuable. He could take rich white people's cars at the Peabody Hotel and park them without a scratch. He could drive field workers to Mississippi and Arkansas. He could even make money driving customers to illegal bootleggers in the middle of the night. And those nighttime drives, those trips to the juke joints and underground clubs where the bootleggers operated, that's where Bobby Blue Bland discovered something that would change his life forever. Beale Street. The street where legends were born. If you've never been to Beale Street in Memphis, you can't understand what it was like in 1947. Imagine every dream, every heartbreak, every hope of Black America concentrated into 6 blocks of music, danger, and possibility. That was Beale Street. The music poured out of every doorway, blues so raw it hurt to listen, gospel that could make you believe in redemption, jazz that transported you to another world entirely. And Bobby Bland? He was pulled to it like a moth to flame. But here's the twist. Bobby didn't like the rough blues everyone else was chasing. While his peers were drawn to the gritty, almost violent sound of Delta blues, Bobby gravitated toward something completely different. Sophistication, elegance, control. His heroes weren't the hard-living bluesmen screaming into broken microphones. They were smooth operators like Charles Brown, Nat King Cole, and T-Bone Walker. Men who wore suits, men who sang like they'd been trained by angels, men who proved you could be black and blues and sophisticated all at once. This choice would define everything about Bobby Bland's career, and it would also make him millions of dollars. But first, he had to meet the man who would change his life, the friendship that built an empire. His name was Riley B. King, but everybody called him BB. B.B. King was already getting famous in Memphis. He had a radio show, he played the best clubs, and he had something Bobby wanted desperately: respect. The story everyone tells is that Bobby Bland was B.B. King's driver, his valet, his assistant, the help. That's not what happened. Here's the truth. Bobby Bland offered to help B.B. King because he wanted to learn. He drove because B.B. needed a driver and Bobby had the skills. He carried equipment because that's what you did when you wanted to be close to greatness. B.B. King never looked at Bobby as the help. He looked at him as a younger brother, a student, a friend. I idolized him, Bobby said decades later, and he never made me feel small. He taught me everything about being professional, about treating people with respect, about the discipline it takes to survive in this business. This friendship would last 60 years. They would record together, tour together, make each other better. But in 1950, Bobby Bland was still nobody, and B.B. King gave him something that nobody else would: a chance. The Palace Theater, where dreams went to die. If you wanted to make it in Memphis in the early 1950s, you had one option: survive amateur night at the Palace Theater. And surviving was the right word. The Palace crowd was famous for one thing: destroying hopeful performers. They came with tomatoes, eggs, and anything else they could throw. They booed, they laughed, they humiliated you in front of everyone, and if you were really bad, the Lord High Executioner would burst onto the stage, dressed in ridiculous robes, and fire blank shots at you while the crowd screamed for blood. The prize for winning, $1, that's it, one single dollar bill. But the real prize, someone important might see you, someone who could give you a real chance. Bobby Bland stepped onto that stage multiple times, and something incredible happened. He won, not once, multiple times. Enough to catch the attention of a man named David Mattis, who owned a small record label called Juke Records. In 1951, Mattis offered Bobby his first recording contract. Bobby couldn't read the contract. He just trusted that this was his shot. And then everything stopped. He got drafted into the United States Army. Just when success was finally within reach, Bobby Bland had to watch it disappear. 2 years of his life gone. 2 years where he should have been building his career, wasted serving a country that wouldn't even let him eat in the same restaurants as white soldiers. But those 2 years in the military taught Bobby something crucial, something that would separate him from every other blues singer in America. Discipline, the voice that broke the rules. When Bobby returned from military service in 1955, he was different, focused, hungry, and ready to do whatever it took. His first job back, opening for Junior Parker, an established star. Bobby drove the car, set up the equipment, did whatever was needed, and he watched, he learned, he absorbed everything. For 5 years, Bobby Bland toured the Chitlin circuit, that brutal network of black clubs across the segregated South where performers were paid barely enough to survive, and respect had to be earned one show at a time. But something was happening. Bobby was developing a sound that nobody had ever heard before. Remember, Bobby never liked the rough, aggressive blues that dominated the era. He wanted something smoother, more sophisticated, more seductive. "I kept wondering," he said later, "what would happen if I took the growl out of the blues and replaced it with some kind of mellow moan. Would people still like it, or would they call me a traitor?" It took about 5 minutes to find out. Women loved it. And in the music business, when women love your music, you win. Bobby developed something he called the squall, a controlled cry that he'd inject at the perfect moment to break your heart. He stole the technique from a gospel preacher named Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha's father, who used it in sermons to devastating effect. But the squall was just one weapon in Bobby's arsenal. The real transformation came when he met a man named Joe Scott, the genius nobody remembers. Joe Scott was an arranger, a producer, a perfectionist, and the man who would create the Bobby Bland sound. From 1958 to 1968, 10 years at Bobby's creative peak, Joe Scott controlled everything. Every song choice, every arrangement, every vocal technique, every performance decision. Scott had a vision. What if you combined raw blues guitar with sophisticated big band brass? What if you took the elegance of Count Basie and the grit of Muddy Waters and fused them into something completely new? The result was revolutionary. Bobby Bland's records didn't sound like blues or soul or jazz or R&B. They sounded like all of it, and none of it simultaneously. They were unique, unforgettable. And they sold millions. But here's the part that will make you furious, the contract that stole everything. Remember David Mattis, the man who gave Bobby his first contract? He didn't own Duke Records anymore. A man named Don Robey had taken over. And Robey was not a nice man. Legend says Robey bought Duke Records by putting a pistol on the table during negotiations. Whether that story is true or not, everyone believed it, because that's exactly the kind of man Robey was. When Robey took over, he rewrote every contract, and when Bobby Bland came in to sign his new deal, Robey knew something crucial. Bobby couldn't read. Robey guided Bobby's hand across the page. "Sign here, and here, and here." Bobby signed. He trusted. He believed this was his chance. That contract paid Bobby half a cent per record. The industry standard was 2 cents. Robey was paying Bobby exactly 25% of what every other artist received. Let's do the math. When Bobby sold 100,000 records, a major hit, he earned $500. Meanwhile, Robey made thousands, tens of thousands, eventually millions. But it gets worse. Robey would also claim songwriting credits under a fake name, Dedrick Malone. This meant he collected not just the recording money, but the publishing money too. Money that should have gone to the actual songwriters. Bobby Bland made Duke Records rich beyond imagination. And he died without ever seeing most of the money he'd earned. When asked about it later, Bobby said something that will break your heart. Well, he's in business. Each company does the same thing. But Roby gave me a chance to record. That's more than anyone else did. That's not gratitude, that's trauma. That's what it sounds like when someone has been exploited for so long they can't even recognize it anymore. The decade that changed everything. Despite the exploitation, the 1960s were Bobby Bland's golden era, hit after hit after hit. I Pity the Fool went to number 1 in 1961. That's the Way Love Is dominated in 1963. Ain't Nothing You Can Do became his biggest crossover success in 1964. Albums like Two Steps from the Blues and The Soul of the Man are still considered masterpieces. Critics rank them among the finest recordings in blues history. But here's what's crazy. Most people don't know Bobby Bland's name. Why? Because unlike Motown or Stax artists, Bobby wasn't pushed into the mainstream. His label marketed him specifically to mature black women in the South, a demographic that major labels completely ignored, but that remained loyal to Bobby for his entire career. Bobby Blue Bland performed more than 300 shows a year at his peak. Think about that number. That's essentially every single night, no rest, no break. Just constant touring through the segregated South, playing juke joints and small clubs, building his legend one performance at a time. And then, in 1973, everything changed again. Juke Records was sold to MCA. The era was over. The decline and the redemption. The MCA years were complicated. Bobby was recording in Los Angeles now, with pop producers who didn't understand blues. Critics said his best work was behind him, that he was finished. They were wrong. In 1985, Bobby signed with Malaco Records in Jackson, Mississippi, a small, black-owned label that understood exactly who Bobby Bland was and what he needed. Malaco had a family atmosphere like Duke used to have, Bobby said. And for the first time in decades, he felt at home. He recorded 12 albums with Malaco, earned 7 Grammy nominations, and released Midnight Run in 1989, an album that stayed on the R&B charts for 18 months and proved that Bobby Blue Bland, at age 59, was still one of the greatest voices in American music. But time was running out. The house where it ended, Germantown, Tennessee, a quiet suburb just outside Memphis. That's where Bobby Blue Bland spent his final years. The house was modest. One story, nothing flashy, just comfortable furniture, family photographs on the walls, and a well-worn recliner positioned perfectly in front of his stereo system. Bobby would wake up early every morning, listen to gospel music, sit on the screened back porch and watch the birds, enjoy visits from his children and grandchildren. He rarely performed anymore, rarely traveled. He had spent 50 years on the road, and now he just wanted peace. But in 2010, his body started failing, congestive heart failure. A progressive disease where your heart slowly loses the ability to pump blood. You get tired, you can't breathe, simple activities become impossible. For Bobby Bland, a man whose lungs had powered one of the greatest voices in history, it was a particularly cruel way to die. His voice, which had once filled arenas and reduced grown men to tears, became a whisper, then a struggle, then silence. June 23rd, 2013. Bobby Blue Bland died at home in Germantown. He was 83 years old. The news spread through the music world quickly. B.B. King, then 88 himself, released a statement. He was my friend and I loved him. His voice was one of a kind. Musicians from every genre paid tribute. Mick Jagger, Eric Clapton. Younger artists who had discovered Bobby's music and been transformed by it, but most of America didn't notice. Bobby Bland had lived quietly and he died quietly. Exactly as he wanted. The funeral was packed. Family, friends, musicians, and fans who had followed him for decades gathered to say goodbye. And near the end of his life, Bobby had said something that explained everything. I'd like to be remembered as just a good old country boy who did his best to give them something to listen to help them through sad moments, happy moments, whatever. I wasn't trying to be the greatest. I was just trying to be honest. The truth about Bobby Bland. Here's what they don't tell you about Bobby Blue Bland. He never wrote a hit song. He never played an instrument on his records. He couldn't read music or lyrics. He was exploited by record labels for his entire career. He died without the fame or wealth he deserved, and yet his voice influenced every soul singer who came after him. His technique is still studied by vocal coaches. His recordings are still played in clubs and on streaming platforms around the world. Bobby Blue Bland never got the recognition he deserved while he was alive, but his legacy grows stronger every year because greatness doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need awards or fame or fortune. Greatness just is. And Bobby Bland was great. The house in Germantown stands empty now, just another suburban home in a quiet neighborhood. But if you know what happened there, if you understand the journey that ended within those walls, you can never look at it the same way again. Bobby Blue Bland was one of the last kings of the blues, and like all true kings, his reign was earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The world lost one of its greatest voices on June 23, 2013, and most people never even noticed. But now you know. Now you understand. Now you can hear his music with different ears. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember the man who couldn't read but could make you feel everything. The man who took the growl out of the blues and replaced it with a mellow moan that women couldn't resist. The man who died in silence in a modest house in Memphis. Bobby Blue Bland, the last king of the blues. Gone, but never forgotten.